When most Minecraft players start building a city, they don't expect it to become the site of a new nationality, revolution, and one of the biggest and most traumatic wars in Minecraft history. This is the city of Manzig, and the story of how it was torn apart by World War. All this history is a true story on the Stoneworks Minecraft server at the IP play.stoneworks.gg. Here, you can live a second life and climb the ladder to make your mark on gaming history. Join today or I'll scream into your ear. Wah! Our story starts in the faraway nation of Anglunia, with two players who started their own prosperous lumber business, Manzland and Navium. In conducting their trade, they were hired to build a harbor in the southeastern city of Kazkaya by the nation, the United Socialist States of Eldom. There was a bit of friction between them, the USSE being a strict one-party socialist state, and their business being free-flowing capitalists. But they did good work, and so the USSE granted them some land on a nearby peninsula, and they built a castle here called St. Nilsburg. A group started to form around this castle town, and they became a prosperous little community of friends. The USSE official, Eurobon, then came to them with a proposition. The USSE had recently annexed a long empty region, where its old ethnic inhabitants had died out. They wanted the group at St. Nilsburg to go out and colonize this land and make it productive, and so they trekked out there and started founding their own new towns. They claimed and preserved the old people's ruins of Klossenfell City. They settled several new villages, and most importantly, Manzland went out and established Manzig, born along the massive diorite bridge he built over the river there. The town grew very quickly and uniquely. A merchant's quarter developed around the bridge and formed the old downtown. It had a brightly colored, kind of Mediterranean architecture to it, with white towers protruding above the rest of the city. Manzig built a great arena, the biggest in the USSE, which held all sorts of games and military exercises for the army there. With this town's aesthetic, vibrance, commitment, and pull, many people moved from the rural villages to the urban center, and the prospects for economic growth and political enfranchisement in the city council drew many migrants from all around the world. Some even had to cram into the temporary housing in an underground mine called the Crap Hole. So the city of Manzig became a real hub of trade and diversity with unique institutions from the rest of the USSE. It became the largest city in the newly settled region, and they started to develop their own culture and identity as Manzlanders, which sowed the seeds for later conflict. But for now, there were a lot of shenanigans. First, the USSE had a national assembly for city representatives in its Communist Party. The election for Manzig's representative was notoriously fraught. Both sides, the capitalist and isolationist player H.R. Wilson, and the more democratic socialist Lavenderist party player Lord L75, engaged in bribery, intimidation, threats, and street violence. The rest of the USSE looked on at the shit show going on in their most quirky province. But Wilson won, and Lord stewed on his resentment. The region of Manzland became an integral and active part of the wider USSE, as many of its citizens became leaders in the military. But the USSE, as one of the most prominent nations in Eldom, was constantly tripping over itself. There's a common expression that its citizens use called the Curse of Laria, where the nation stumbles into wars over and over again, always loses, but never really declines or dies like many other nations do. But as you can imagine, the military officers wanted nothing to do with the civilian government's diplomatic f***ery. So they went on strike, and many of them quit. The Manzlander leader of the strike, Tygadog, was banished from the USSE, so he kept a low profile and lived in a Manzlander swamp village. Things just got more sour from here, as rumors circulated of Manzig plotting a rebellion, and the USSE government took them very seriously. They punished them with new taxes and fines upon Manzig businesses. They rejected their appeals to the National Assembly, officially denied the Manzlander identity any recognition, and even sent USSE loyalists to settle in Manzland to wrestle control over them. It was at this time that the founding members of the city, Wilson, Mandes, Lord, and Fried, all joined in a secret conference called NECOM. They decided that they wanted independence, but they weren't strong enough to push for it now. But in these meetings, which slowly grew to include more players, they defined themselves as a politically distinct people destined to be free. In time, the wider global geopolitics set the stage for the next developments of Manzig's history. The The USSC had lost a large conflict called the Red War, and with their military exhausted, the Manzlanders jumped on the USSC's moment of weakness and declared themselves independent. The USSC rattled their sabers and threatened them with war, but they were in no position to invade. So, they sat down and negotiated an agreement that allowed Manzland to secede as an independent country on its own ethnic borders. And so, the nation of Manzland was finally born.
Shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor, lie in the morning.
But while all this happened, the shadow of the USSC began to loom over them once again. The USSC at this time had joined in with one of the biggest empires that Minecraft has ever seen, known simply as the Imperium. The Imperium was a military and diplomatic juggernaut, and it had more than enough firepower to back up an invasion into the itty-bitty nation of Manzland. The USSC issued a 48-hour ultimatum to Manzland: join back with us or die. So out of desperation, the Manzlanders sought help from their other neighbor to the west, a nation called the Vulperium. The Vulperium was a powerful nation of fox people. Furries. Excuse me. And they had recently won some territorial wars. But their diplomacy proved to be reckless, and their government had a bad reputation with many of the great powers of Eldom. But ever the empire, the Vulperium's leader reached out to Manzland to annex them as an autonomous duchy. This royally pissed off the USSC, which then cut all relations with the powerful nation. It was also controversial among the Manzlanders, pushing them to a brief but failed Lavenderist coup under player Lord L75. It was kind of a meme, but kind of not. Many other nearby nations, like Skilding, Sylvania, and Shirokineza Velerin, had grievances with the Vulperium and its people, from broken treaties to misinformation to border disputes. Now, we don't know how much of this is fair or true, but clearly, many people were incredibly angry. A web of allies started forming around the diplomatic meetings where they lambasted the Vulperium for its supposed excesses. But it all came to a head when the Duchy of Manzland and some mercenaries conducted a raid on USSC fighters. They used the hated player Tygadog to lure USSC warriors into the Nether, and then they jumped out in an ambush and killed them. They then went to the USSC city of Sanguinople to go and slay a bunch of other players. Outraged and insulted, the socialist nation approached the forming web of nations, and they together declared the anti-Vulperium coalition of the Eldom Alliance. The leader of Velerin, the famous businessman Your Imperialism, demanded $15 million in reparations. The Vulp leader declined and defiantly declared that his nation was unbreachable and uninvadable, and so a coalition war was declared. The Vulperium was fortunate to quickly snag PvP support through their allied players, Moi and Baron 110 of Kartek, so it all ballooned out into a world-engulfing war. And since Manzig was at the center of the whole rivalry, everyone knew the invasion would storm right into their city. The USSC military general, player Mystic Yearheart, built a giant wall along the border with Manzland, and then, leveraging the land claims that he owned in the region, he secured the town of St. Nilsburg and destroyed it by renovating it into the USSC's war base. Tygadog was able to do the same for the Manzlanders and got the claim ownership of a fort called Kamyanek, but they couldn't take advantage of it because it was too far deep into USSC territory. Manzig, meanwhile, set up its war defenses. They dried up their river, dug a massive chasm trench around their city, and made their walls far thicker and taller to withstand the incoming barrage. Much of the city's old town was gonna have to be torn up in preparation for the war. As the defenders questioned the Manzlanders about what they should tear up, Mandes told them, "Do not worry about what you may or may not destroy. As the mayor and builder of Manzig, I grant each and every one of you permission to dismantle the city to its very core if necessary. I would rather see the city destroyed than to have it fall into the hands of our oppressors. The spirit of the city resides within its people, and we have no intention of remaining should we lose this battle." Little did he know how prophetic his words would be. The Eldom Alliance's army rolled into Manzland as expected, and they struck straight at the capital. The defending garrison tried to hold them off, but the Alliance successfully built over the trench and started blowing up the south wall. The Alliance charged up onto the wall, and heavy fighting ensued. The Vulperians and Alliance troops repelled each other on and off each section of the wall in a back-and-forth melee. But in the end, the Vulperium pushed the Alliance off the walls and repelled them out of their city. By the end of this first battle, the Vulperian and Manzlander forces took heavy casualties. Many of the defenses had been broken down, and the outer city was destroyed. So the Vulperium and Manzlanders built everything back up, larger, bigger, and thicker, tearing down more of their city, enclosing an even smaller space within the bastion. When Vulperium scouts discovered that many Alliance troops were out fighting in another war, they sent several small attacks against the captured St. Nilsburg base, but none were successful against the garrison there. The Alliance later returned its troops and began another march down for the Second Battle of Manzig. As they rolled up to the city, the commander from Shirokineza, player Aggression, used a levitation potion to ascend over the wall and blew it up from his covert spot. The Vulperian defenders took formation around their defensive ganks and fall traps, so as the attackers charged in, many were caught in the holes and taken out of the fight. The Vulperians then killed many others off and drove them out. Again, this battle was destructive to the city's fortifications, so they made them even bigger, thicker, and tore down more of the homes in Manzig. But the Eldom Alliance came back sooner than expected, and instead of directly assaulting the town, they surrounded it and laid siege to it. As the Vulperian forces fired arrows down at them, they took the time to construct a massive sky bridge overhead. The Alliance sent many warriors up there. They successfully jumped down and pushed the Vulperians off the walls in several sections. Fighting ensued on the rest of the wall tops, and even down in the city streets. In the battle chaos, the defending soldiers were shot down from above, and so the Alliance poured around the city streets and pinned them down in a melee. The defending troops fled out of the country, back to the Vulperium and the back country. After 3 battles, the Eldom Alliance had successfully taken the capital for themselves. The Vulperium then tried to muster up a new army. They'd been bled dry of resources, and many of their mercenary allies weren't willing to fight any longer. So while the Manzland and Kartek militaries made preparations to take the city back, the Vulperium's government capitulated. The war was suddenly over, and the military was not made aware of this for 4 days. After long negotiations, the Vulperium paid its debts and gave over territories to the victorious allies, including the Duchy of Manzland. This was the end of the grueling conflict that is now called the War of the Furries. The USSE excitedly annexed Manzland back, expecting a resurgence in their population and wealth as the region had once provided before. But the war had left Manzig as a hollow, war-torn shell of its former self. Truthfully, it was more because of the expanding strategic defenses that replaced the historical districts than the carnage of the 3 battles. As Mandes had said, the city was destroyed before it was annexed, and now all that was left was its people. So the Manzlanders gathered up what little they had left, and together they abandoned their homeland for greener pastures. But the city's story does not entirely end in doom and gloom. Its people built up a new city under the waters of Anglunia, and the USSE general, Mystic Yerhart, eventually revolted from his nation and took with him a vast amount of the western land claims. So he gave the new Manzlander, Holy Canon 110, ownership of the claim, and now it exists as a monument to its history and downfall in the war. If you happen to stumble upon the old bastion of Manzig, just know that its bricks were laid from creativity, love, and passion. Join our server today if you want to make stories like this at play.stoneworks.gg on Minecraft Java Edition. I've been Stony, and thank you for watching.